Hello. Hello, my name is Dale Adams of Planning Ahead of Time, and today I'm speaking with Lorna. Lorna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, so yes, I'm Lorna Vyse, and I'm a childhood bereavement specialist and author of children's bereavement support books.
Okay, well, you and I are both members of End of Lifers Facebook group, and I've seen the books that you've launched, but also wondered, how did that come about? What is your past?
Okay, so professionally, trained as a lawyer originally, but started to work with children and young people in scouting and realised I quite liked sort of working with children. And so I qualified as a professional youth worker and so did lots of youth and community work. But then sort of did a little bit of a sidestep move and started to work for victim support. So working with young victims and young witnesses to crime, and realised that we were referring these children who had sadly been affected by murder and manslaughter, was sort of referring them to a sort of a local Norfolk child bereavement charity, and they were sort of getting on really well. And they came back with some really positive outcomes of the time they'd spent with other young people. So I went and volunteered for that charity. And I'm really pleased to say I'm still involved with them even now. And I think I found my passion at that point, that although I liked working with children and young people, I really liked the fact that children were clearly suffering as a result of a bereavement, a significant loss that they'd experienced, and realised I could sort of put the two together. So at that point, I went and worked. I was just being made redundant from a role, timing, divine timing, perhaps.
Perfect.
So went along to exactly, went along to that children's bereavement charity as they were actually advertising a role at that stage, and thought, this is where we'll go. And I stayed there for 10 years. So did one-to-one work with bereaved children, young people, families. But towards the latter part of that 10 years, I was much more involved in project planning. So taking what the young people said would help them and sort of creating resources and sort of we worked with a panel of young people to see how we could better support bereaved children. And I've always sort of harbored that little thought about I'd really like to sort of write a book in that period of time. Pandemic hit. We all sort of know how that sort of impacted on us. But for me, as personally, I found it incredibly difficult to be furloughed when, the pandemic hit and lots of people were being bereaved. And I just felt like I'd got my hands tied, because I think at the first part of furlough, you weren't able to do anything if you were being paid. I mean, it was quite random, really, wasn't it? But so from that, I sat down and started to germ that idea about those bereavement support books, came out of lockdown and actually changed a little bit of direction and started to work for a national children's bereavement charity and working with bereaved military families. And then did actually self-publish these books. And so more recently, in the last sort of 2 months, I've decided to become fully freelance and really explore how I can put my passion for bereaved children and young people into a different way, and also to give me time to write, because once you're working full time and trying to write some books, it's actually quite a challenging thing to do all at the same time. So that's what I've been doing. So I deliver training, writing some more resources, just about to publish my next book, etc., etc. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Wow. I think that's sort of an incredible, very, very quick and concise overview of what is years and years of working with bereaved children, from the sound of it. So what
it's about 20 years. It's a bit worrying, isn't it?
were they that you started working with at the time?
Sorry, say that to me again.
What age group was it that you started working with at the time?
Okay, so the children's charity I worked with was 0 to 18s. And so you support those families. People say, how can you support a 0-year-old? If a child is 6 months, they don't grieve. Well, actually, you're never too young to grieve. And we sort of all know that children can be impacted by the caregiver versus, they'll recognize that somebody is missing. So we do a lot of work sort of with families directly there to how to support children and young people. And then you'd go all the way through different ages and stages of development of children, but up to the sort of 17-year-olds, in order to sort of really explore with them on a one-to-one. They might self-refer, for example, about their significant bereavement and how it is impacting on them. So, and anything in between, really, because of course with childhood bereavement, you can be bereaved at a point in time at your age, but there's no sort of getting over it. Your life sort of changed. And so one of the most sort of things that I was quite passionate about is that if people were re-referred in, if children re-referred when they were different ages, then you just pick up with them at that point because their level of understanding changes as they get older. So it was really interesting that you'd work throughout that whole breadth of age group. And more recently, it's been sort of up to 25s because I sort of feel 18 to 25s get a bit lost in a system around grief and loss. So I was really pleased to be able to do that. And I think sort of lockdown, the pandemic has allowed people to access a bit more of that sort of online, in that age group in particular, it sort of makes something a little bit more accessible. So some people like face to face, some people prefer the online. And I think it's opened up to children and young people getting more support in the way that they want it, which is a really good positive outcome, really.
Yeah, very much so. It's changed everything. And as you say, you can now get to so many more people rather than people who are only in the sort of the small locality of the actual bereavement counselling if it's one-to-one. So I think it's made it much more accessible for many more people. In saying that, you've obviously found that the bereavement counselling helps, and I say that because I think a lot of people feel that children are coping because they don't always show it in exactly the same way as adults do, and therefore I sometimes feel that even with those that I work with, the children still maybe get missed a little bit and maybe aren't put in for the counselling that they really do need. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, there's two things about that. First of all, that it's deemed that children are the forgotten mourners. So on a national basis, when we register deaths or whatever, we never actually have any idea. We never ask people to register how many children there are impacted. So in terms of bereaved children, nationally, people just don't know what statistics there are and how children are impacted. So that's the sort of first part of that. And there's some government campaigns at the moment. We're really trying hard to get some sort of campaign in place really to say, let's register these children and let's just work out how many children there are. There's some statistics that say every sort of 22 minutes a child is bereaved of a parent in the UK.
Wow.
So that's really substantial numbers, isn't it? And if you think about those children, they are deemed to be the forgotten mourners, because what we do as a society is we try really hard to protect children. That's brilliant, isn't it? We want to protect them, but we can't take this hurt and pain away around grief. But what we do is we sort of put children in another room and shut the door and don't quite give them all the information. And we use euphemisms about someone, we've just lost granddad. Or if you're a young child, it's like, where have you lost him? I lose my PE kit or my books or my toys. Let's go and find granddad again. So there is a lot around children and young people and how they're supported that we don't really sort of get as a society. And I do training and deliver training for people, which is just trying to explore some of those social norms about, do you agree that a child should be able to go to a funeral? And in my career, I've heard so many times people say things to me like, but I don't want them to go there because they're going to see everybody upset. And I just think, but the child is grieving as well. And this is sometimes about explaining to child what's going to happen at a funeral. And be able to give them the choice of whether or not they'd like to go. And you might want to put some things in place to make sure that they're supported during that. But why shouldn't they go along and see everyone cry and cry along with them? Yeah. So I think forgotten mourners is a term we use into the industry and the specialism I have, because, it is exactly that. Children are often sort of meant to be seen or not heard or protected to such an extent that they don't get clear information. And just picking you up on one thing when you talk about counselling, and I'm just being really open and honest about this. I'm not a trained counsellor. I'm a bereavement support worker when I'm doing that face-to-face and fully qualified postgraduate certificate, etc., etc. However, people just assume that children need to have a counsellor, and that has its own little sort of stigma to it. My child needs counselling. Well, actually, sometimes they just need someone who's willing to talk about death, dying, and bereavement. And that's why people like myself, with the right qualifications and the right experience, can just sit with the child and go, so what do you know and what don't you know? And let's talk about burial and cremation and what happens when someone dies and all of those things that we shy away from because we don't want to upset children. But they're actually far more resilient than we give them credit for. And if we give them open, clear, honest, bite-sized, age-appropriate information, they'll cope with things so much more.
Yeah. I once worked with a family and the little girl was 6. And what was happening is it was the little girl's mother, but she had 2 sisters. The mother had 2 sisters. And then there was the grandmother, like her mom. And so when the sister died, every time the little girl tried to talk about her mom, everybody got upset. And eventually the little girl basically stopped talking about anything. And what they had done to try not to upset the little girl was move family photos out of the way and anything to do with a mom, because they thought that would help. And actually it had the reverse effect. So the little girl just stopped being open, stopped speaking, became sort of very solitary. And then when they came to me with her, I mean, this was quite a long time ago, and we then started to discuss it. She then went and basically got professional support, which I wasn't able to offer at that time. And she was creating memory boxes, going where there were other children, where she could talk about it. And they put pictures of her mom back out. And I said, even though you're upset, you really need to allow her to still speak to you. But they went and they had the correct support for the little girl. And they said it was just transformational for them all, really. And I think that's what's so important. Whereas they thought that, like you say, they were actually helping by not really having a lot about her mum around her, thinking that would stop her getting upset. But you need to get upset. It's important to be able to cry and to verbalize how you're feeling, regardless of age.
Absolutely. And in my experience, and I could sit here and bore you with lots of different cases, and I won't, but I've had situations where I've gone into a school because a child's behavior has changed, and it might be that their relationship with the person that's died was not a great one, or mum and dad's might have not been good, and one of those parents died, and then the other one's just almost relieved they're not here anymore, and that child's got no one to talk to at home. And then they go to school, and I've had situations where children have tried to share their story in school in a playground, and you've had other parents have come in and said, look, they keep talking about death. Can you have a word with the child to make sure that they don't do that, because they're upsetting my child? And so even school staff were going and having a conversation with the child to say, you're upsetting all your friends by talking about your parent. And what does that teach a child? It's just teaching them that they've got no one, people don't want to talk about it. And what we should be saying is we should be encouraging those children to have an outlet to talk about the person that's died or dying. And to really give them that space and opportunity to explore their own thoughts and feelings and what that might be, and understand what's going on. Because again, one of the main reasons I got into this many years ago, or I knew that I'd got a bit of an issue, is I remember working, I was in scouting, and a young person was sort of 9, and his mum was dying of cancer. And I remember being out dog walking and seeing him one day, and I sort of asked him how he was and how his mum was. And I remember him saying something to me like, oh, well, I know the doctors have been in today because there's bags of tablets in the house. And, my naivety way back when, I sort of went, oh, and didn't really know what to say. But what that young person was really sort of reaching out and saying is, someone just needs to talk to me, because this is really scary stuff happening to me at home, and I've got no one to talk to. I have spoken to him since, and his mum did die, and I've chatted to him a lot since he's been an adult. So it shows how many years ago it was. But I think those type of experiences make you realise how important it is. No one sets out to make sure children get upset, exactly as you've said. But if we're not careful, we sort of forget their needs. They almost become the big elephant in the room, as someone said to me yesterday, which was a really nice way of putting it, because I talk about elephants in the room around death and dying. But actually, the child and the child's needs could almost become the elephant in the room, because no one really wants to explore it, because no one wants to go there, because what if the child gets upset? Well, that's sort of natural. We wouldn't say it to an adult, would we?
No, and like you say, I've heard many a time where people have said, well, or even to talk to me, yeah, that's fine. Can you go and play somewhere else? And again, the children are sent away, or that is very normal, isn't it? That people feel that there are adult discussions around death, very much so.
Yes, and that's probably one of the main reasons why I wrote the books that I wrote, because I also think And this is no disrespect to any literature out there. There's some fantastic resources out there, so I'm going to put that out there straight away. But I almost felt that a lot of books talk about animals as characters and bits and pieces, but there was very few books that I could really put my hands on that allowed you to think about what happened immediately after you got told someone died, and what are those arrangements, and what is a funeral, and what's a cremation, and so I decided, in my naivety at the time, because I thought writing 3 books at the same time was a really great idea, but it turns out it's a lot of hard work. But I decided to have this sort of scenario of a mum that died very suddenly. And you don't really need to know how she died, because sometimes I think we can get focused on the reasons why rather than sort of the practicalities of death itself and life cycles. So I wrote 3 books. They're standalone books, but the mum dies, and each of the 3 books is from the perspective of the 3 children of the family. So also recognizing that people grieve differently. So you tell those 3 children, but if one's 5 and doesn't really understand what death is, they might go, well, when's mummy coming back? Versus a 14-year-old that hears her younger sister saying things like that and go, oh, I can't cope with this. Mum's just died, and look, she doesn't even get it. And so that's why I really wanted to explore some of those themes about how adults are, how children get impacted, those initial conversations, having conversations with children about, would you like to go to a funeral? Do you know what it is? Would you like to go and view the body if it was appropriate? Everyone will think I'm now going to recommend that. And I'm not. I'm just saying sometimes we exclude children from those conversations, where in fact we could have a wider conversation, and then children can make up their own mind if they've got enough choice and information around those things. And so that's where the books came from. It was really my passion to make sure that there were some resources out there that dealt with some really challenging, sensitive stuff. I mean, people say, cool, these are tough reads. Well, yes, they are a tough read. But if a child has just experienced the death of their parent, that's tough as well. So let's try and put something in place that helps them. And in my books, I try and have the voice of young people in it. So I have a sort of narrated chapter. I then have a sort of journal slide sort of page, which is where the child's voice comes in, what I think they might be thinking in the story. And then I have Q&A sections after every chapter. And the children can just ask questions, and their amazing auntie seems to have the answer to every sort of scenario. I don't know who she's based on, but basically she comes up with a sort of the really sort of good textbook answer, if you like, of all of those different things. Because I really hope that what we're doing is we're helping supporting children and young people, but I really hope the books will educate adults into how to talk to children and young people as well, because it's so important. Language, terminology, choice, empowerment. If we don't, we're setting them up to fail and setting some of their emotional health and well-being back, because we've got to grieve, but you can only grieve if you know all of the different elements and the different pieces of a puzzle to your story to help it make sense. It's still going to hurt, but actually if you get that, then you can strive to cope with that and learn how to sort of move on.
I do think, as you say, when you're writing the books for children, when they hopefully will be read sometimes maybe to the children or read with parents, you're educating from both sides, aren't you? And I think that's also very important, because everybody grieves differently. And Stephen Garrett has written the 7 languages of sorrow, or 7 languages of grief. And it's really important to understand that we don't all become quiet. We don't all sob and cry. Some people will actually want to be very creative and they'll explore it through art. Other people, they want to write poetry. Other people will maybe become more that they actually want to hit things and they can let it out in a different way, maybe through going out into the woods and stamping around. And I think it's a way of allowing people to look at it through your books, that we are all different. One, it's age, but also it's different personalities and different characters, and how we as a whole person deal with that grief, and how that's okay. As long as you're not harming anyone or yourself or anyone else, it's okay that we're all grieving differently.
Yes, and your point about age there is so important, because of course age and development, textbook versus reality are 2 very different things. And that's what I wanted in the books. I want these children to have different personalities. So one that's quite outgoing, and Ben, which is the middle book, is a young boy who is he's sort of aged between 11 and 12. So he's going from primary to secondary education, which again is one of those really challenging transition times that I think is difficult for bereaved children. So I focused on that quite a bit. So he's already got quite a few anxieties going on about moving from this small school to this large secondary school. And then in amongst that, he's grieving the loss of his mum and not really knowing how to navigate it. So again, I try sort of put some tips in there about sort of how to support children in school or what you might want to explore. And I always put that obviously the schools are always great and brilliant at doing this, but reality is some schools are fantastic, and others just really don't get grief and loss and think children should just get over it. But as you've said, you know, your reactions to grief can be so different. And the teenager, Alex in the books, she's just struggling with being a teen, and suddenly, you know, her mum has died. And her mum is the one person that she's looking for at that moment more than anything, because they used to go out and have sort of moments together or go shopping and spend some quality time, and then it's all gone. And I do, towards the end of the books, just explore a little bit about Dad. You know, time goes on, but Dad has a sort of a different relationship, and how that impacts on the children and how they view. But even things, real practical stuff about clearing out mum's wardrobe, and you know, how do you navigate Mother's Day, and those sort of really practical things that I hope it's not the textbook answer, but it's enough in the story to then get people to think, well, how can we mark that occasion? How can we still celebrate that person's life? We've got to navigate the change, but still have the continuing bond, because that's what we're talking about in grief and loss, really, isn't it? Is about how you relocate that person and continue to love them, but in a different way. So I really hope they do that. Yeah.
Well, they sound amazing. I've only seen bits of them online. I don't actually have them, so I haven't read them. But everything you're describing, I think it's just fantastic that you've put these out there, and the fact that you've self-published as well, I think is incredible. So well done to you.
Thank you.
Where do people get them from?
They're only available at the minute on my website, so www.lornavyse.com. And there is a reason for that. I can put them out in a different way, but I have really tried to make sure that these are a quality book, quality paper, quality printing, a nice soft touch lamination, because I think they're a difficult read. And yeah, I can put them on some print on demand sites, but I can't guarantee the quality. So at the minute, that's what I do. And if people order those books from me, they also get a couple of extra little additions in there that I hope will support. So yes, on my website, lornavyse.com. The new book that's coming out is Saying Goodbye to Nanny, which I'm dealing a little bit more with pre-bereavement as well. And Nanny becomes ill. Again, you don't know exactly why, don't feel it matters, but she does go to a hospital. There's some beautiful illustrations in my book around hospital scenes, and then a hospice scene, and Nanny dies in a hospice. So again, different again, but that's available for pre-order at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to that being launched, and that probably becoming a bit of a series, that's Saying Goodbye to, because the next one I'm writing at the minute is around pet bereavement. And there's always animals in all of my books. There's always a picture of a dog, there's always a cat on board, there's always a pet somewhere, because I think we underestimate pet death, but also totally we underestimate the sort of healing capacity of animals. So you'll see a theme of those in the books as well.
Brilliant. Okay. So it's on your website, and I assume if somebody goes to your website, they will, did you say it was lornavyse.com or
.com? Yeah, lornavyse.com. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And if anybody goes to your website, the details will be at the end of this chat. They can contact you through it, or is there an email or anything you would like to give out?
Yeah. Yes, you can contact me through the website. And one of the things I'd really like to say is if people are stuck and they're thinking about, is there a book? Because this book is not going to be appropriate for everybody. And I totally understand that. It's quite niche. I think it would be amazing for funeral directors and celebrants as well, because I think, you know, in that sort of industry, that will give them quite a lot of learning. But one of the things I was going to say is also alongside the books on my website, there's a lot of resources that I have on there. So downloadable web worksheets. So again, if anyone out there is sort of working with a family and they don't want to buy the books, but they want to sort of think about changes in a family after a death, although they're linked to the books, they're actually self-contained. So people can just download them and freely available to do that. But also people are free to have a conversation with me. Pop me a message if you go, this is the situation I'm in. I don't really know, is there a book you'd recommend? Is there a service you'd recommend? I'm passionate about making sure we get things right for children. So I'm always happy to be a soundboard if people have got a question about a child or young person. So yeah, email me, lornavyse.author@gmail.com, or just go through the website and I'll pick that up. There's a contact button through there. And I'll be really happy to help because, yeah, the books are part of what I do, but they're just a fraction of what I do, really.
Yes, yeah, I've been on your website, so I have seen the other resources that you also have available, and the fact that people can contact you for your specialism in child bereavement or anything really to do with obviously end of life and helping people through that process. So it's been really lovely to speak with you, Lorna. Thank you very much for your time and for everything, all the information that you've given today. And we'll no doubt at some point speak again when you have your next books out.
That would be amazing. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it.
Lovely. Thank you, Lorna. Bye.